Good afternoon. Welcome to Book Bites with Maggie. My name is Maggie Carr. I'm the Youth Services Assistant here at Napanee Public Library. Joining me is my co-host today, Miss Jan. She is also going to be a public service staff member, somebody you're going to see frequently around the library if you come in and visit us. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about books that confine us. So it might be anything from being in prison, being in jail, being in an internment camp. I also have one where they are in an insane asylum, so this is going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to be kind of our organic, Jan, as we're working through our books. I know we both brought a good stack of books to talk about today. Some I have read, some you've read, some of them we have both read. So I'm eager to see what our conversation looks like.
That will be great.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one that I wanted to grab is one that I read a couple of years ago. This is straight off of our teen shelf here at the Napanee Public Library. This is The War Outside. I was very unfamiliar with this part of history. Usually when you're talking about internment camps, I'm always thinking about across the ocean. And this one is very different than that. This one's actually going to be in 1944. It takes two teen girls who meet in an internment camp here on American soil. They're actually both housed in Crystal City, Texas, and they are placed there in a town that is completely surrounded by a barbed wire fence, and they're expected to play on their football team and to be cheerleaders and to hold jobs, but they are there during the duration of the war. So it takes characters who seem surreal and puts them in the reader's orbit. So by being teenage girls. So it says they can't trust their country, but can they trust each other? So this was a really fun one for me that gave me, I shouldn't say fun. I don't feel like any of these books that we read today are fun, but it definitely gave me something to think about. I didn't know anything about Crystal City and the internment camp there. So, I mean, it's never touched on, I don't think, in history. So Monica Hesse here, she has written lots and lots of books, but if you're looking for a great historical fiction book, she is an author to definitely have on your radar. Okay, I did this wrong, so let's go this way. Do you want to share a book with us, Miss Jan?
Sure. I will share The Green Mile because this is a Stephen King book, but not your typical Stephen King book. It's about an inmate who is on death row, wrongly convicted, but nevertheless he is going to be executed. He knows this. He has a gift of healing people. And the thing that struck me the most was the warden, because you always think of the warden as a bad guy, a mean guy. And this one was one who treated prisoners with dignity and humanity, and the contrast between that and what you expected was moving. I really enjoyed his presence in the book. We have this as a book and an e-audio, and you might have heard of it because it was made into a movie that became very popular featuring Tom Hanks. So I would recommend it. It was actually published in 1996 as a series of 6 short installments and was put together as a book, and I felt that it was really good and well worth reading.
Very good. Just recently I read Corrections in Ink. This is a memoir by Carrie Blakinger. She was a Cornell student, and a life of extreme sportsmanship as a younger person. I had not ever heard or thought about what it looks like to be a functioning drug addict. Okay, like I've heard of like the term being a functioning alcoholic and how you can maintain a lifestyle where nobody understands what your foes are. In this memoir here, she talks about how her upbringing and assuming she is going to be an Olympian figure skater all comes to crumble, and she absolutely loses her direction in life, and for years and years and years she is a closeted drug addict, and it takes her being completely out of her mind and being caught with a Tupperware dish full of heroin walking down the street to find her behind bars. This is the memoir that's going to follow not only her incarceration, but it's also her redemption story. Carrie does a fantastic job of showcasing what it means to be a very intellectual person and to be striving to always be your best, even through your time in jail. So it doesn't just stop when she gets out of jail. So then it goes back through when she goes back to college and how she jumps back into her life and now what she's doing to advocate for other people who have found themselves in that predicament. Corrections in Ink is one that we have also available not only as a book but as an e-audiobook as well. And if you're looking for a great memoir, this was one that really stood out to me.
One of the classic prison books is Orange is the New Black, and many people have heard of it because it was made into a movie and then a TV show. I've not seen either one. I've only read the book, so I would like to hear some input from people who have done both and compare them for me.
Yeah.
This is the story of Piper Kerman, and her story is an honest one about being involved in a crime and years later after the crime being caught and sent to a women's prison. And I thought, okay, I'm going to read this because I feel like I should, but I don't think I will appreciate a story about a woman's prison. It took me by surprise that she addressed the humanity of the people who were there, as well as the relationships she had with people outside the prison who were supporting her. She was just there for a year, but that was long enough to get a good handle on the situation and to be able to express her thoughts clearly with some humor about how to sustain an environment like that and how to make it better.
Yeah.
So I appreciated the book, and if you haven't read it, I'd recommend it.
And we do not have that on our physical shelves, but we do have available as an e-book, and I think it's an e-audiobook as well.
I believe that's right.
I read that one, and honestly, I think between that one and A House Without Windows, one of those was like probably the kickstart to reading books about being in confinement. It really got me thinking in a different light what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes when they're in prison. So, very good. Okay, so this is a pretty popular book. Kate Moore is the author of Radium Girls. If you have never read that one, it is highly recommended. This book here is one that absolutely captivated me last year. This is The Woman They Could Not Silence, One Woman, Her Incredible Fight for Freedom, and the Men Who Tried to Make Her Disappear. It is about one person. It is about one person. And she lives in 1860, and her name is Elizabeth Packard. She kind of is a woman ahead of her time. She likes to speak without putting too much thought into it. And you know, in that time period, that was absolutely, you don't do it. You do not do it. You are 2 steps behind your husband. You are not talking until you are spoken to, and you absolutely do not share your dreams and desires with the open world. What Elizabeth experiences in her marriage, she is the mother of 6, and she's been married to a man for over 21 years, and she's kind of tired of being quiet. And when she starts speaking up, her husband absolutely disdains her and goes above and beyond himself to actually have her committed to an insane asylum. And she is kept there, practically kept hostage, and then experimented on amongst multiple other women in this insane asylum. And she's just trying to be herself, and she is kept hostage in this insane asylum. And then the doctor that's there is almost worse than her husband, or is worse than her husband. It is unequivocally a story straight from the history books about how far we have come as a society and what is not appropriate anymore. So this one, it's like over 500 pages, and I read it in 3 days. Like, I could not get it out of my head. Fantastic story. This one we do have available in multiple formats. Again, Kate Moore is a fantastic author, so if you haven't read this one and you've read some of her other ones, highly recommend putting this one on your list. We have it as a book, an ebook, an e-audio book, and then we also have it as a book on CD here in our Napanee Public Library collection. She has the will to fight, and it comes across in the pages. There are a couple of pages on the inside of the book as well that will even feature, actually I think it's the end papers, that show you where she lived, there in that insane asylum, on the cover jacket of the inside of this book. It was fantastic, but also absolutely haunting. I have a book that I want to share after you do that one. So you share your next book, Miss Jan, and then we'll keep going.
Why don't I do this one next?
Yeah,
and
that'll
then
work.
We can go from there. This is called The Cadaver King and the Country Dentist. and I have to look at that as I read it because I always mess up one of those.
Yeah, you want
my
to
head.
intermix them.
I do. Redney Balco and Tucker Carrington are the authors. But this book, you won't believe it's true, but it is true. So you keep reading and your mouth drops open.
Oh my word, I gritted my teeth the entire time I read this book. I listened to it, and I distinctly remember washing dishes and like wanting to slam my dishes in the sink. I was so mad.
Exactly.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So they had to have somebody to blame for a murder. Who better than these two guys who had alibis and were convicted anyway, and there was no real evidence. What there was what we would call today fake news, fake evidence by somebody who claimed to be an expert in forensic dentistry. And he could identify if you did this murder based on the bite marks on the body. So,
From an autopsy on the side of the road, in a ditch, in an unclean autopsy scenario. You're just like everything, all the red flags as you're reading this going, how in the world was this person given the authority?
This can't happen. This
Yes.
can't happen. But it kept happening.
It kept happening.
And
Is it
not only
nonfiction?
were these two convicted,
what?
Is it nonfiction?
It is
it is
nonfiction.
nonfiction. Took place in rural Mississippi and Alabama. And after evidence came out that proved that this person did not commit a murder, they started looking at the names of the people who had helped convict him, and the same names kept popping up. And it was
One after another after
this,
another.
yeah, coroner and county dentist. And so they started looking at the other cases for people who had been convicted, and lo and behold, they had convicted strings of innocent people just because they needed somebody to
take the fall
to take
for
the fall, to
crimes.
take the blame. So I do recommend that you read it. You won't like it, and you'll want to throw things like we did, but it's worth reading, and to realize that this is not a book that's 100 years old or 75 years old. I think it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, recently
The
enough that
1980s?
Yeah, the Jim
Yeah.
Crow era.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Goodness.
that it absolutely couldn't happen, but it did, and not all that long ago.
Yeah.
Now you can take
So,
off.
okay, so I wanted to say a couple more things about this one. So I didn't realize that you get paid to kind of be an expert
Oh.
in
Like an expert witness?
an expert witness. Yes, like you make money. I knew that you kind of like made money when you're in the jury box. So like that was not new to me, and I don't know why I never made the connection that that could be like a lucrative income for somebody until I read this book. So like Jan was saying, like that was their job. So like, yes, you hire in a coroner, that person, that is their job, is to do autopsies. The amount of autopsies as this guy does in like a year, there's no way that he could have even slept, let alone drove from one location to another location in his county to have done an autopsy in like say 35 minutes or whatever. Every single thing that you learn in this book, you're like, how did this happen?
And didn't
How-
anybody
and
know
over
this?
and over and over again. Yeah, how did they not realize they were paying the same people to be on the witness stand over and over and over again? It
They were
is
teamed.
Oh yes, absolutely a team. I mean, friends, absolutely friends that just totally demoralized one person after another person after another person. Now, it does not deliberately say in this book that Anthony Ray Hinton was one of those people, but he spent almost 30 years on death row in Alabama for a crime that he did not commit.
I'm so glad you brought that one.
Have you read this?
I've read that one too.
Okay, so this is actually going to be one of our cover-to-cover book club picks for later in this month. And this story is about a man who completely has an alibi. He is at work in a, what do you call it when you have to like go through an armed guard to get to work? Like a check-in station? That's not right.
Yeah. Security?
A security. He had to like go through a security entrance, and he is like on the clock at his job, and he is put down for murder. Like a long way from his house. He has a complete alibi, and he is thrown into this whole mix. Now again, I don't specifically remember him being mentioned in this story, but the timelines match up. And he spent almost 30 years on death row. And just like in the Green Mile, when you're talking about being right down the same hallway. He watched 54 people in his time there walk past him to the death chamber.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? And like hearing, and he talks so specifically about the smells of death. And he came and he, like the prison guards, they knew that he was not there of his own accord, but there was nothing he could do. He got stuck in this cycle, and it's just, it just gave me all the heebie-jeebies.
So does it explain how he lasted so long?
Yeah, I mean,
being
it got to
put
the point
death?
that the prison guards
Yes.
were like asking him for marriage advice, and he started cooking for them. They would let him into the break room in the prison, and he would still like be cooking for the prison guards. Like they totally trusted him. He started book clubs. He did all these wonderful, wonderful things. But that's not the life you want to live, is behind bars. It is. Oh my word. Okay, I could go on and on. If you want to discuss this book more in topic, or if you read this one and now you want to learn more about this one, definitely come to Cover Book Club this month, because they're going to like dissect it for an entire hour. It's amazing.
And I'd like to
So-
say one more thing.
Yes.
How did he survive? He made a decision
Yeah.
about what he was going to do with his attitude and how he was going to live his life. And you might think, oh, well, he made that decision after he was released and decided not to be bitter.
I feel like it was like 3 years in.
But it was
Yeah.
early on in his sentence, and it changed everything for
Absolutely
him.
everything. I did realize just before we came, whoops, there it goes. Just before we came on live here with Book Bites, that there's a young readers edition. So if you don't want to spend a couple hundred pages reading this, we do have a young readers edition of that. I would say it's probably similar. I haven't read it.
Jamie said we need a book flight for the Cadaver King, Sun Does Not Shine, and Just Mercy.
Ooh.
Yes.
Have you guys
I
read
have
the
not read Just Mercy, but
Mercy?
I've heard it's a good one.
So those three must go
They must
very
go
well,
really well
together.
together.
It's the same,
Yeah.
story. Yeah.
It's Anthony Ray Hinton's story. Okay, I feel like I can't get enough, and we had to like totally pare down the books that we're talking about so we don't go crazy. This one, The Cadaver King and the Country Dentist, we have as a book, an ebook, and an e-audio book. And then this one here, The Sun Does Not Shine, we have it as the book, the ebook, the e-audio book, and then again the Young Readers Edition that we were mentioning.
And it's the cover to
My-
cover book club pick for
this
October,
month.
September.
No. September? I think it's September.
I think
they
yeah,
have it right now.
September.
But like my heart is just racing when I started making these connections, because I don't even know these people and I just want to absolutely advocate for them.
And I'd like to add this one to the flight, as long as we're planning a flight of books, because the topic is exactly the same.
Yeah.
I'm a big John Grisham fan, so when I found that he'd read one that, or written one that was nonfiction, I wanted to read it, of course.
And he wrote, did you see this? He wrote the foreword to this one. So they all kind
Okay,
of mesh together.
does John Grisham write true crime fiction?
This is a true story.
Or
This
does
is
he write
nonfiction.
crime fiction?
Some, but he also writes just fiction.
Oh,
I would
okay,
say
yeah.
mostly they're legal fiction,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
but they, of course, involve crime, so
Right, yeah.
he knows what he's talking about.
Sure, yeah.
But he wrote this one about Ron Williamson, and the story is familiar. He was convicted of a murder he didn't commit and proved innocent. So I won't spend a lot of time on this because it's the same story, but yet it's one more individual that was released finally from prison due to the work of the Innocence Project, and John Grisham works with that organization. So I again recommend it. I think it'll make you just as mad as some of the others did, but it's interesting to see how the wheels turn, and I guess it's just good to know that at least some people are finally, with additional evidence and DNA and money, because it takes money to dig into these old cases, being able to prove some people innocent. So I appreciated it.
Yeah. It does talk a lot about, in some of these books, how there's like a backlog
Yes.
of testing and how much money that costs, and you're like, you understand that there's significance in all of those things, but it's all tied together at the same time. So I don't remember which book it was. It might not have been one of them that we ended up bringing with us here, but I didn't realize that victims have to pay for their own DNA test kits on a rape kit. I had no idea. Absolutely no idea.
And
It's
how do you
like-
make money when you're in prison? to go back and revisit a case.
Yeah, and not only that, but to buy menstrual products and to buy things in the commissary and things that, things that you need.
So do some of these books talk about prison life?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So
not just
some
what
of them
got
are
there,
like,
but what happens when they get there?
yeah, a lot of them are written in like parts. So like before I went to jail, while I was in jail, when I got out of jail, and how I have changed my life. I feel like they're kind of written in these sections. Now, a book that takes place over the course of a 30-year jail sentence, you cannot fit that in just a couple of chapters. So you have like long periods of time that are not accounted for in the pages, but you definitely get an understanding of the big moments that impact that person. The next book that I wanted to talk about is actually a sequel. Dear Martin is from Nick Stone. It is a young adult book that kind of took the world by storm a couple years ago. I didn't write down the date. This is the follow-up. Dear Justice is also going to be a teen book. It's a hard-hitting sequel to that Dear Martin one, and it talks about when Quan is in jail and he's incarcerated and he starts writing letters to Justice. It takes you back to what it looks like to be involved in a police-oriented crime. This one didn't make me cry nearly as much as Dear Martin, but you definitely get the feels. Both of them are an epistolary type novel, so you have that writing style of what it looks like for healing and to also connect to the other people on the outside. So if you're looking for one that's not quite as heavy, no, I shouldn't say that. They're still really heavy. It's just a teen book, so they're not as long. They're not going to go into as much detail as some of these multiple 100-page memoirs are going to do. I know we both read this next book that you have here on your list.
I'll put him on the cover here.
This one was highly recommended to me. I was so thrilled to see that Jan brought this one to talk about today. Go ahead and share what you've got.
Well, Danny Trejo is an actor in I don't know how many movies, but he's always this big tough
Like
guy.
hundreds.
And what you might not realize when you see him is that he has really lived prison life. He grew up in a situation where he was introduced to violence and drugs and was put in prison, I would say, at a fairly young age. So he's lived it, but not just a prison, all the big California prisons.
Yes.
And his story was, I would say, much different than Piper Kerman's in Orange
Oh,
is the New
absolutely.
Black, just
Yeah.
because of the clientele
He was like
and the
maximum
experiences
security prisons.
that he had in prison. And I was horrified,
Yeah.
but I have no idea what it would be like to be put into that environment.
No, and he talks about the extreme violence even within the
Yes.
prison and the gangs that are there behind bars. It's I listened to this. Did
I
you
did
listen
too.
to it? Okay.
I did.
So he narrates it himself. So Danny Trejo, you know his voice, and so you feel the emotions come through his narration of his own book. He speeds up parts that are exciting and he slows down, and you can almost feel him being reflective as he is writing his story. And he's very frank about what it looks like to find healing even after being in jail. He definitely helps with some nonprofits, and he kind of stumbles into Hollywood, and he's very concise about that too, what it looks like to just kind of be graced with this amazing chance to do a 180 in your life. And like Jan was saying, he was not raised in a home that was cheering him on for great success. There was heroin around him. He was in an abusive home. And so then he takes that multi-generational stigma, and then as a father, he's also very frank about what it looks like to know that you don't know how to father the way that you want to father. And that he struggles not only to motivate himself in being a parent to his own children who are in situations, but that he can help somebody off the street, and he can't make it match in his head and how that really hurts him as a father. That he can help somebody he doesn't know, but he struggles to help the people in his own home. It is fantastic. There is a great section in this book as well that has great photography. So after I listened to this one, I had to check out this book too, because you have like all the pictures. It talks about the people that entered his life. He had an uncle that was very, very good to him, and the pictures are just fantastic.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to. And now of course, now we want tacos, right?
Yes.
Trejo's tacos. I like it. A couple of years ago, I read this book. This is Breathing Fire, Female Inmate Firefighters on the Front Lines of California Wildfires. It is written kind of from the perspective of the journalist, the investigative reporter, Jamie Lowe. She started writing, it was for a newspaper, maybe New York Times, I think, and she took those articles and she expounded upon them. She went and for years and years, she got to know these inmates. I didn't know that there were firefighters that as part of their incarceration could serve their time being firefighters, wildlife firefighters. Yeah, and so like when I made that connection, it was like, wow. Now, I could see him being a firefighter. He's big, he's bulky. You can see him carrying these heavy pieces of equipment up the side of a mountain. But then I think about a woman with just a couple of weeks training being put in the same situation, and it totally changes your mindset of what it looks like to pay for your crimes. In this story, Jamie's gonna take just a few of the inmates that she really gets to know, and it goes back and forth between being the history behind the inmate, what crimes she committed, why she is put in jail in the first place, and then why she opted to serve as a firefighter. And then she kind of weaves it all together. So it's mentioned, this book is mentioned in other books that I've read about firefighters getting hurt in the line of duty, and many of those are inmate firefighters just because of the lack of training. It was a very different perspective to me to read this, that with so little training, you could be out there fighting fires amongst so many other hundreds of people who get paid well to do that when they're making $1 an hour. It was absolutely fascinating to me. Breathing Fire is available also as an e-audiobook on Libby or Overdrive. It just kind of comes back full circle with being lots of short stories, but the way she writes them together, they combine. Okay, can I keep going?
I'm done.
You're done. Okay, I've got two more. Okay, The House Without Windows. This one is not new to Book Bites. I talked about it a couple of years ago. It is my introduction to reading outside of the United States. Nadia Hashimi writes from an Afghanistan standpoint. This was the very first book that I read from her that made me appreciate the American justice system. I did not realize until I read that book that in other countries, India being another one that I've read many books about, that the children and the teenagers of women who are incarcerated are also in jail with them. That never crossed my radar as being something that was culturally acceptable in other countries. So in this story, this is a fictional story, but you feel like it's real. It jumps back and forth between a woman who finds her husband murdered in her courtyard, but completely at a loss for words. They take that as being guilt, and she is put behind bars. There she gets to know a whole bunch of other women inmates. They're in Afghanistan. And it takes an Afghan-born American lawyer, did I say that right? Mm-hmm. Like went to law school in America?
Yeah.
Okay. To come and start advocating for her. And then it's a back and forth between what happened before jail, during jail, and then it's also her lawyer's perspective of coming and going from the United States in his home life and then going back and forth and advocating in Afghanistan for our main character. It was absolutely awe-inspiring. I definitely felt transported.
Is it
in the
fiction?
story. It is fiction, but it felt realistic. Yeah, it was really good. She has written lots of other books as well. I did read another one.
It
Like A Night Without Stars.
It sounds like the one about from the. Is there one from a child's perspective?
There is, yes. I'm gonna totally butcher the name. Padma something. It's the child's perspective from the Indian culture.
From growing up in jail.
From growing up in jail. Yeah, he's born behind bars, and that's the title of it. He's born behind bars, and then all of a sudden, the new warden is like, okay, you're old enough, and without any knowledge of what it looks like to live on the outside, is just, there you go. His dad doesn't know he exists, Nobody comes for him, and he's just kind of out there. I feel like he's like 11. It just tears at you. Late last night, I finished this last one, so I'm going to be really quick with it. This is I Can Take It From Here, a memoir of trauma, prison, and self-empowerment by Lisa Forbes. This is a story of, again, a lady who had a very, very traumatic upbringing. She is abused from within, not only physically, but emotionally and religiously by the religion her family practices. It kept me up last night. It kept me up because you don't really understand somebody else's perspective until you give them the floor to share from their heart how traumatized a person is before they make one altering decision. She is already such a hurt person when she finds herself killing her daughter's father right in front of her. She pays for her crime, and years and years and years later is still fighting for the freedom that she deserves after she served her time. She is what is she? There's a specific term that she uses in the book. She's a reformed citizen. And so then she takes it upon herself to start a nonprofit where she's also helping other people who have been reformed through the prison system and helps them to advocate to get jobs that they qualify for through some of the education that they received in prison, to get the housing that they need, and how it all goes hand in hand. Oftentimes, she mentions in there that oftentimes inmates, they've served their sentence, they have done their due diligence, they have checked in with all their parole officers, and on paper they're totally clean, but then they cannot move forward in their life because they're made to continue to serve a sentence that no longer exists. So that's something I hadn't thought about as well.
So just to look at life as like a convicted felon?
Yeah. I mean, filling out paperwork. She graduated high school at 15 and was in college, like, did she go to college? I don't remember if that one is different. But like, extremely, extremely well educated, could work in a law firm, and if she applied and worked underneath the temp agency, she was able to do so much more than if she was hired in to do things because the background checks, the length of the background checks were different. It's just, again, how many books did we read about jail today, Jan, between us? Like many, many, many. And each one hits you in a different way.
That's true.
It takes a different chapter from a different perspective or a different decade, and it changes everything. In our comments, we're going to leave a list of not only the books that we talked about today on Book Bites, but we're also going to leave a list of some other books that we didn't have time to talk about. I hope that we found some books that might pique your interest, give you something new to read. If you're joining us for Expand Your Horizons this year, one of the books that you're supposed to read is something that we recommended here on Book Bites with Maggie. I know myself, I've had to pick up some books that I hadn't read yet that were from some of my co-hosts. I have not read all of the books that you mentioned today, so I'm going to have those on my radar as well. And next month, I promise that we'll be a little bit more lighthearted because these ones are heavy hitters, definitely making you have all the feelings. But it definitely gives you, it doesn't give you all the feelings.
No, next month is death.
Oh. Okay, the first episode.
After that.
No, the first I was looking at the next episode. The next episode is foreign-born authors. So the ones that I was pulling for that are already like more lighthearted reads. But Michaela's right. The second episode in October is going to be books about death. So I'm glad we put a fun one in between.
Yes, that was fun.
We did have a few comments.
Okay, what's up?
Jamie said that she loved this episode. It was awesome. And Danny Trejo's story blew her mind. She has tremendous respect for his continued recovery advocacy.
Yeah.
And then Jessica said that she was loving this, so hopefully she got some good books. And then we'll leave some more in the comments, right?
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. We'll leave a full list, as well as I know there's a couple that we got so excited about. I didn't mention what formats they came in, so we'll include that in the list as well. So thank you so much, Jan, for joining us. I
I
hope I
enjoyed
didn't
it. Thanks
scare
for
you
having me.
too much.
No,
I
no,
was
no.
shocked how many books that we came up with together that we could talk about on this theme. So until the next episode, we'll see you. Come in and see us here at the library, and we'll be happy to find some books for you.
Bye-bye.